Elena Rossi stood in her wedding gown, white silk clinging to her trembling frame, when she heard the words that destroyed her world. Through the crack in the door, her groom's voice carried clearly. "She actually thinks I love her. God, the look on her face when I tell her it was all a bet. That'll be worth the million alone." Laughter followed. Cruel, careless laughter. In that moment, surrounded by flowers she didn't choose, and wearing a dress bought with lies, Elena realized she wasn't walking toward marriage. She was walking toward humiliation. But what she didn't know was that someone was watching. Someone dangerous. Someone who would change everything. Thank you for joining Elena's story. If you want to see how far her journey takes her, please stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Teat. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of the bridal suite at the Grandview Hotel, casting fractured rainbows across Elena's face. She sat motionless before the mirror, hands folded in her lap, while the makeup artist applied the final touches to her lips. The woman chatted cheerfully about the weather, about how beautiful the ceremony would be, about how lucky Elena was to be marrying into the right family. Lucky. Elena studied her reflection. The face staring back looked like a stranger's, polished, perfected, empty. Her dark hair had been twisted into an elaborate updo, woven through with pearls that cost more than her mother earned in a year. The wedding gown, a creation of Italian silk and French lace, hung on her frame like a costume. It was beautiful. Everything about this day was beautiful, everything except the hollow feeling in her chest. "There," the makeup artist said, stepping back with satisfaction. "You look absolutely stunning, dear, like a princess from a fairy tale." Elena forced a smile. "Thank you." The woman gathered her supplies, still chattering about romance and destiny, and left Elena alone in the suite. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Through the windows, Elena could see the gardens where the ceremony would take place in less than an hour. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway draped in roses, guests already beginning to arrive, their expensive cars lining the circular drive. 6 months ago, Elena had been working double shifts at Marco's diner, her feet aching, her uniform smelling of grease and coffee. She'd been living in a one-bedroom apartment with her mother Rosa, stretching every dollar until it screamed. Medical bills from her father's death 2 years prior still arrived monthly, each one a reminder of loss and debt. Then Caleb Wright had walked into the diner. He'd been different from the usual customers, polished, confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Elena's car. He'd smiled at her, asked her name, left a tip that made her hands shake. He'd come back the next day, and the next. Within a week, he'd asked her to dinner. Within a month, he'd told her he was falling in love. It had felt like a dream, like the universe was finally giving her something good after years of struggle. "You deserve this," her mother had said when Caleb proposed, tears streaming down her face. "After everything you've been through, taking care of me, working yourself to exhaustion, you deserve to be happy, mija." But standing here now, in this borrowed beauty, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for the dream to shatter. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the bridesmaids, Caleb's cousin's friends, women she barely knew, who'd been assigned to her like accessories. Instead, her mother entered, moving slowly, leaning on her cane. Rosa Rossi had aged a decade in the 2 years since Elena's father died. Grief and illness had carved lines into her face, stolen the color from her hair. But her eyes still held that fierce love that had kept Elena going through the darkest times. "Mama," Elena stood, crossing to her. "You should be resting. The ceremony isn't for another hour." "I wanted to see you," Rosa said softly. She reached up, cupping Elena's face with a trembling hand. "My beautiful girl, you look just like I did on my wedding day." Elena covered her mother's hand with her own. "I wish Papa was here." "He is here, in his way." Rosa's eyes glistened. "He would be so proud of you, Elena. You've worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and now you'll never have to struggle again. Caleb will take care of you." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they twisted something in Elena's stomach. "Mama, Can I ask you something? Of course, mija. Did you ever doubt? Before you married Papa, did you ever feel like... Elena paused, struggling to articulate the unease that had been growing for weeks. Like maybe things were moving too fast? Rosa studied her daughter's face for a long moment. Your father and I knew each other for 3 years before we married. But every couple is different, Elena. Caleb loves you. I've seen the way he looks at you, the way he takes care of you. He paid for my surgery, helped with the medical bills, gave you a life I could never provide. That's not your fault, Elena interrupted. You gave me everything. I gave you struggle, Rosa said firmly. I gave you nights when we didn't know if we could pay rent. I gave you a father who worked himself to death trying to keep us afloat. Caleb is giving you security, safety. That's worth more than anything. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to say that safety without love was just a prettier cage. But she couldn't voice the thought, not when her mother's surgery had cost $40,000 that Elena could never have paid. Not when the medical bills that had crushed them for 2 years had vanished overnight, settled by Caleb with a casual wave of his hand. She owed him. They both did. You're right, Elena said quietly. I'm just nervous. That's natural. Rosa kissed her forehead. But trust your heart, mija. You wouldn't have said yes if you didn't love him. After her mother left, Elena stood at the window, watching the garden fill with guests. She recognized some of them from the engagement party, Caleb's business associates, his father's friends, society people who looked at Elena like she was a curiosity, the girl from nowhere who'd somehow caught the heir to the right fortune. The door to the suite was slightly ajar, and voices drifted through from the hallway, male voices, coming from what Elena knew was the groom's preparation room 2 doors down. Can't believe you're actually going through with it. The voice was unfamiliar, tinged with amusement. A deal's a deal. That was Caleb's voice, smooth and confident. Besides, it's only for 6 months. Once the trust fund clears, I'll file for divorce, collect my money, and be done with it. Elena's breath caught. She moved closer to the door, her heart beginning to pound. Still can't believe she fell for it, another voice said, followed by laughter. You really sold the whole love at first sight thing. Please. Caleb's tone was dismissive. She was desperate, working at that dump of a diner, drowning in her dead father's debt. She practically threw herself at me. All I had to do was smile and throw some money around. Easiest million you'll ever make, the first voice said. Your father's a bastard for setting that condition, though. Must be married for 6 months before accessing the trust. What kind of old-fashioned bullshit is that? The kind that made me find the most pathetic, grateful woman I could, Caleb replied. Someone who wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't make demands, someone so used to having nothing that a few expensive dinners and some paid bills would make her think I hung the fucking moon. The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel. Does she know about Vanessa? Another voice asked. God, no. And Vanessa knows to keep her mouth shut until this is over. She's not happy about it, but she understands it's just business. 6 months of playing house with the charity case, then I'm free with my inheritance, and we can finally get engaged properly. She actually thinks you love her. More laughter. That's almost sad. The look on her face when I tell her it was all a bet. That'll be worth the million alone. The voices continued, but Elena couldn't hear them anymore over the roaring in her ears. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The room tilted. She reached out, gripping the edge of the vanity to keep from falling. A bet. It was all a bet. The dinners, the flowers, the promises, lies, all of it, lies. The surgery he'd paid for, not an act of love, but an investment. The bills he'd settled, not generosity, but strategy. Every word, every touch, every moment she'd let herself believe she was finally worthy of love, calculated manipulation. She was pathetic, grateful, desperate. The words circled in her mind like vultures. Elena looked at herself in the mirror. The beautiful stranger stared back, and suddenly Elena understood why she'd felt like she was wearing a costume. Because she was. She was playing the role Caleb had written for her, the grateful poor girl, the charity case, the bet. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. 6 months. He was planning to use her for 6 months, then discard her like she was nothing. The door opened, and one of the bridesmaids, Madison, she thought, or maybe Mackenzie, stepped in, her phone in hand. "Oh my God, you look amazing!" the woman gushed. "We're about to start seating the guests. Are you ready?" Elena stared at her. Ready. Was she ready to walk down an aisle toward a man who'd bet his friends he could make her believe in fairy tales? Ready to speak vows that meant nothing to him? Ready to smile for photographs that would commemorate her own humiliation? Her voice cracked. "I need a minute." "Sure, of course. Take your time." The bridesmaid's smile was bright, oblivious. "But don't take too long. You know how Caleb gets when things run behind schedule." When the woman left, Elena sank onto the small sofa, her dress pooling around her like foam. She should run. She should tear off this gown, grab her mother, and disappear. They could go back to the apartment, back to the diner, back to struggling, but at least being real. But even as the thought formed, she knew she couldn't. Her mother's surgery, the medical bills, the money Caleb had already spent, money that had saved Rosa's life. If Elena ran now, if she humiliated him by leaving him at the altar, what would he do? Would he demand repayment? Would he destroy them for making him look like a fool? Elena had nothing. No savings, no resources, no power. She was exactly what Caleb had called her, desperate, trapped. The words settled over her like a shroud. She stood slowly, smoothing her dress, her hands still trembling. In the mirror, the beautiful stranger looked back with dead eyes. If she had to go through with this, if she had no choice, then she would at least face it with her eyes open. No more dreaming, no more believing in rescue or romance or any of the lies she'd let herself fall into. She would walk down that aisle. She would stand beside a man who saw her as a transaction, and she would find a way to survive the next 6 months until she could walk away with whatever dignity she had left. But as she picked up her bouquet, white roses that smelled too sweet, too perfect, a small, fierce part of her whispered a different truth. She didn't want to survive. She wanted to destroy him the way he'd destroyed her. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it felt like the first real thing she'd felt all morning. But the gardens were perfect. Of course they were perfect. Caleb's mother had hired the most expensive wedding planner in the city, sparing no expense to create an event that would make the society pages. Crystal chandeliers hung from the trees, catching the afternoon light. The aisle was lined with rose petals. A string quartet played something classical and romantic that Elena didn't recognize. Everything was beautiful. Everything was a lie. Elena stood in the doorway of the hotel, hidden from view, watching the guests take their seats. There were at least 200 people out there, most of them Caleb's family and friends. On Elena's side, there were exactly 7 people: her mother, 2 cousins she barely knew, her former manager from the diner, and 3 other waitresses who'd felt obligated to come. The disparity was glaring, another reminder of how little she belonged in this world. "Miss Rossi?" The wedding planner appeared at her elbow, tablet in hand, smile professionally warm. "We're ready to begin. Your mother has been seated. The processional will start in 2 minutes." Elena nodded mutely. "You look absolutely radiant," the woman continued. "Caleb is a very lucky man." The laugh that escaped Elena's throat sounded harsh even to her own ears. The wedding planner blinked, confused, but before she could respond, the music changed. The processional was beginning. Elena watched the bridesmaids make their way down the aisle in their pale pink dresses, each one looking like they belonged in this world of wealth and beauty. Then the music swelled into the wedding march. This was it. Her cue. Elena stepped forward, her bouquet gripped so tightly her knuckles were white. The doors to the garden opened, and suddenly everyone was looking at her. 200 faces turned in her direction, expressions ranging from curiosity to approval to something that looked suspiciously like pity. She began to walk. Each step felt mechanical. Left foot, right foot, smile, breathe. Ahead, at the end of the aisle, Caleb waited beneath the rose-covered arch. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, his blonde hair styled just so, his handsome face arranged in an expression of loving anticipation that Elena now recognized as performance. She thought he was beautiful when they first met. Now, knowing what she knew, all she saw was the mask. Their eyes met. He smiled wider. She kept walking. Halfway down the aisle, Elena's gaze drifted to the guests. She recognized Caleb's father in the front row, stern, imposing, the man whose archaic trust fund requirements had made Elena into a pawn. Beside him sat a woman Elena had never seen before, stunning in an emerald dress, watching the ceremony with barely concealed irritation. Vanessa, Elena realized. That must be Vanessa, the real girlfriend, the one who mattered. Something cold and hard crystallized in Elena's chest. She reached the altar. Caleb extended his hand, his smile never wavering. Elena took it, her own hand ice cold. "You look beautiful," he murmured, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Thank you," she replied, her voice flat. If he noticed her tone, he didn't show it. He turned to face the officiant, still holding her hand, playing his part perfectly. The officiant began to speak, words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Each phrase was a knife twisting deeper. Elena's mind drifted. She imagined standing here in 6 months, listening to Caleb tell her the truth, watching his face as he explained that it had all been a lie, a bet, a game. The look on her face would be worth the million alone. Speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause, no one ever actually objected at weddings. It was just a formality, a relic from, "I object." The voice came from the back of the garden, deep and accented, carrying absolute authority. Every head turned. A man stood in the entrance to the gardens, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that looked both expensive and dangerous. He was dark-haired, olive-skinned, his features sharp and Mediterranean. Even from a distance, Elena could feel the power radiating from him, the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet. "This wedding cannot proceed," the man said, his Italian accent unmistakable, "because it is built on deception." Chaos erupted. Guests began murmuring. Caleb's father stood abruptly. The officiant looked bewildered. "Who the hell are you?" Caleb demanded, his hand tightening painfully around Elena's. The man began walking down the aisle, unhurried, his dark eyes fixed on the altar. 2 other men materialized from the shadows, flanking him. They moved with the coordinated grace of bodyguards, or soldiers. "My name," the stranger said, still approaching, "is Luca De Luca, and I'm here to tell Miss Rossi the truth about the man she's about to marry." Elena's heart was hammering. She had no idea who this man was or why he was here, but something in his voice, steady, certain, protective, made her want to hear what he had to say. "This is insane," Caleb said, but Elena noticed his face had gone pale. "Security!" "Your security has been dismissed," Luca said calmly. He'd reached the altar now, close enough that Elena could see his eyes were a deep, penetrating brown. "As have your photographers, your videographers, and anyone else who might have documented what I'm about to reveal." He turned to Elena, and when he spoke, his voice gentled slightly. "Miss Rossi, your name is Elena, yes?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Elena, you deserve to know that the man standing beside you made a bet with his friends. He wagered that he could convince a woman, specifically a desperate, vulnerable woman, to marry him within 6 months. The prize was access to his trust fund, $1 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elena stood frozen, but she wasn't surprised. She already knew. She'd already heard. What she didn't understand was how this stranger knew. "That's a lie," Caleb shouted, but his voice cracked. "This man is insane. Call the police." "Please do," Luca said mildly. "I have recordings of your conversation this morning with your friends. Shall I play them for your guests? For your father? For your mother?" Caleb went silent. Luca returned his attention to Elena. "You also deserve to know that he has a girlfriend. Her name is Vanessa Cortez. She's sitting in the 3rd row, wearing green. They've been together for 2 years. She's agreed to wait while he marries you, divorces you, and collects his inheritance." Elena's eyes found the woman in green. Vanessa's perfect face had gone white. "This is—" Caleb started, but Luca cut him off with a single raised hand. "I'm not finished." His voice hardened. "You should also know that Mr. Wright has no intention of honoring the financial agreements he made with you. The surgery he paid for your mother? He's already filed paperwork to reclaim that cost as a fraudulent expense. The moment you sign those divorce papers, he will sue you and your mother for every penny, plus interest. Elena's knees buckled. Luca moved fast, catching her elbow, steadying her. How, she whispered, how do you know all this? Because I make it my business to know when powerful men prey on vulnerable women, Luca said quietly. And because your father once did my family a service. A debt is owed, Miss Rosie. Today, I am here to repay it. The mention of her father jolted through Elena like electricity. You knew my father? I knew of him. He was a good man, an honest man. Luca's expression softened. He deserved better than to have his daughter used as a pawn in a rich boy's game. Tears burned behind Elena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. Caleb found his voice, though it shook with rage. You can't just... This is my wedding. You have no right. I have every right, Luca said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Or would you prefer I call your father's board of directors and inform them about the insider trading you've been conducting for the past 8 months? The SEC would be very interested in those transactions. The blood drained from Caleb's face. You're finished, right? Luca continued. Your trust fund, your reputation, your little scheme, all of it ends today. The only question is whether Miss Rosie chooses to end it publicly or privately. He turned to Elena, and his eyes held a question. The choice is yours, he said softly. You can stay. Marry him. Let him use you for 6 months and then discard you while stealing everything you have left. Or you can walk away. Right now. Under my protection. Protection. The word hung in the air. Elena looked at Caleb, the man she'd thought she loved, the man who'd saved her from poverty, from struggle, from pain, the man who'd seen her desperation and decided to exploit it. Elena, please, Caleb said, and now his mask was cracking. Fear leaked through. Whatever he told you, it's not true. I love you. You know I love you. She almost laughed. Even now, even with everything exposed, he was still trying to manipulate her. No, she said quietly. You don't. She pulled her hand free from his grip. And I don't love you either, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I loved the lie you sold me. I loved the fantasy of being rescued. But you, the real you? She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. You're just a spoiled little boy playing games with people's lives because you've never had to struggle for anything real. She turned to face the crowd. 200 people stared back at her, silent, shocked. This wedding is over, Elena announced. Her voice rang clear across the gardens. I will not marry a man who sees me as a bet, who sees me as something to be used and discarded. She looked at her mother, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face. Mama, I'm sorry. I know what this means. I know what we'll lose, but I can't do this. Rosa stood on shaking legs and did something Elena never expected. She smiled. Then don't, mija, Rosa said firmly. Your father didn't raise you to be anyone's bet. The words broke something open in Elena's chest. She turned back to Luca, this mysterious stranger who'd appeared like something out of a dream. Why? She asked. Why are you helping me? Because someone should have helped your father when he needed it, Luca said simply. And because men like Caleb Wright only survive when women like you have nowhere else to turn. He extended his hand. Come, let me offer you what he promised but never intended to give. Safety. Elena looked at his hand, at the choice he was offering. Behind her, Caleb was speaking rapidly to his father, his voice desperate. Around her, guests were pulling out phones, recording, whispering, turning her humiliation into entertainment. But Luca's hand remained steady, patient, waiting for her decision. Elena took a breath, then she placed her hand in his. Okay, she whispered. Luca's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. He guided her down from the altar, and as they walked back down the aisle together, Elena heard Caleb shouting behind them. Threats, pleas, curses. She didn't look back. The guests parted like water, some shocked, some scandalized, some, Elena was surprised to see, approving. She caught sight of Vanessa, the woman in green, who met Elena's eyes with something that might have been respect. They reached the entrance to the gardens. A black car waited, sleek and expensive. One of Luca's men opened the door. "Wait," Elena said, pulling back slightly. "My mother is being brought to the car as we speak," Luca assured her. "I would not leave her behind." And there, emerging from a side entrance, was Rosa, supported by one of Luca's other men, her cane in hand, her face bewildered but trusting. "Mija?" she called uncertainly. "It's okay, Mama," Elena said. "We're leaving." As they settled into the car, Elena and her mother in the back seat, Luca beside them, the vehicle pulled away from the Grandview Hotel. Elena watched through the rear window as the gardens receded. The guests were still standing, still staring. Caleb was nowhere to be seen. The car turned onto the main road and the hotel disappeared from view. Elena looked down at herself. She was still wearing the wedding dress, the pearls still woven through her hair, the makeup still perfect on her face. A laugh bubbled up, half hysterical. "I can't believe I just did that." "You were magnificent," Rosa said, squeezing her daughter's hand. Elena turned to Luca. He sat calmly, watching her with those dark, assessing eyes. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "Somewhere Caleb Wright and his family's influence cannot reach." "And then what?" A small smile touched Luca's lips. "Then, Miss Rossi, you begin again. On your own terms. Not as anyone's bet, not as anyone's charity case, but as yourself." The words settled over Elena like a benediction. She leaned back against the leather seat, her mother's hand in hers, and watched the city stream past the windows. Somewhere behind them, her wedding, her beautiful, perfect, poisonous wedding, lay in ruins. And for the first time in 6 months, Elena felt something that wasn't dread or doubt or desperate hope. She felt free. Outside, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, painting the world in gold. Elena closed her eyes and let herself breathe. The lie was over. Whatever came next couldn't possibly be worse than the truth she'd escaped. Could it? The drive through the city felt surreal. Elena watched familiar streets blur past, streets she'd walked 1,000 times when she couldn't afford gas, streets where she'd waited for buses in the rain, streets that had witnessed every exhausted step of her old life. Now she sat in a car that probably cost more than she'd earned in 10 years, still wearing a wedding dress, still trembling from adrenaline, still trying to process what had just happened. Beside her, Rosa clutched her hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. Her mother's face was pale, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were clear and focused on Elena with an expression that mixed concern and fierce pride. "Are you all right, Mija?" Rosa asked quietly. Elena almost laughed. Was she all right? She'd just walked away from her wedding after a stranger exposed her groom as a manipulative liar in front of 200 people. She'd publicly humiliated one of the city's wealthiest families. She'd thrown away what little security she'd managed to grasp. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "Ask me again when I can feel my legs." Luca, who'd been silent since they left the hotel, glanced at her with what might have been amusement. "The shock will fade. What you did back there took courage most people never find." "Or stupidity," Elena said. "I haven't decided which yet." "Courage," Rosa said firmly. "Your father would have been proud." The mention of her father sent a fresh wave of questions through Elena's mind. She turned to Luca, studying his profile. He was probably in his mid-30s, she guessed, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it weren't so severe. Everything about him spoke of control, from the way he sat, perfectly still despite the car's movement, to the way his hands rested calmly on his knees, to the watchful alertness in his eyes that suggested he was always 3 steps ahead of everyone around him. "You said you knew my father," Elena said. "I said I knew of him," Luca corrected gently. "There's a difference." "What kind of difference?" Luca was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Your father, Antonio Rossi, did work for my family many years ago. Nothing illegal," he added quickly, seeing Elena's expression shift. "He was a driver, primarily, but he was also honest, loyal, and discreet, qualities that are rare in any business, legitimate or otherwise." "A driver?" Elena repeated. Her father had worked so many jobs over the years: construction, warehouse work, delivery routes. She'd known he'd driven for some wealthy family when she was very young, before the jobs became scarcer and the bills became heavier. For your family. For my uncle, specifically, Dominic DeLuca. He trusted your father implicitly. Luca's expression softened slightly. When Antonio left our employ to focus on his own family, my uncle promised that if the Rossi family ever needed help, the DeLucas would provide it. That promise passed to me when my uncle died. So this is about a promise made to a driver. Elena couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. You crashed my wedding, destroyed Caleb's reputation, and took on one of the city's most powerful families because of an old employment agreement? I honored a debt because honor matters, Luca said simply. And I stopped a predator from destroying an innocent woman because that matters too. The car turned off the main road onto a private drive that wound through carefully manicured grounds. Elena caught glimpses of high walls, security gates, cameras mounted discreetly among the trees. They were leaving the city, heading into the wealthy suburbs where estates sprawled across acres of land, hidden from ordinary view. Where are we? Rosa asked, her voice weak. My home, Luca replied. You'll be safe here while we figure out next steps. The car rounded a final curve, and a mansion, came into view. It was modern but elegant, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, set against a backdrop of mountains that caught the afternoon light. The grounds were immaculate, the kind of landscaping that required a full-time staff. Elena's stomach tightened. She'd just escaped from one wealthy man's control. Now she was being brought to another wealthy man's home, wearing a wedding dress, with nowhere else to go. As if reading her thoughts, Luca said quietly, You are a guest here, Miss Rossi, not a prisoner. If at any point you wish to leave, you're free to do so. I'll even provide transportation and funds to help you get wherever you want to go. Why would you do that? Elena asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. People like you don't help people like me without wanting something. Luca's dark eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. People like me? Rich, powerful, men who show up at weddings with bodyguards and insider information and the ability to destroy someone's reputation with a phone call. Elena gestured at the mansion as the car pulled to a stop. This doesn't look like the home of someone who helps out of the goodness of his heart. You're right to be suspicious, Luca said. After what Caleb Wright did to you, you'd be a fool to trust anyone, especially another man with money and power. He opened his door, then turned back to her. But understand this. I don't want anything from you except the satisfaction of knowing I kept my uncle's promise. Your father earned that much. He exited the car before Elena could respond. One of his men opened Rosa's door, helping her out with careful attention to her cane. Another opened Elena's door, offering his hand. Elena sat frozen for a moment, her mind spinning. Every instinct screamed at her to be careful, to protect herself, to assume the worst. But those same instincts had failed her spectacularly with Caleb. She'd seen kindness where there was manipulation, love where there was calculation. Could she trust her judgment about anything anymore? Mija? Rosa called softly from outside the car. Come. Let's at least see what he's offering before we judge. Elena took a deep breath and accepted the bodyguard's hand, stepping out onto the gravel drive. The dress caught on the car door and she had to gather the massive skirt to free herself. The absurdity of the situation hit her again, standing in front of a stranger's mansion in a wedding dress that had been bought with lies. I need to get out of this thing, she muttered. Luca had been speaking quietly to one of his men, but turned at her words. Of course. Maria, my housekeeper, will show you to a room. She's already prepared guest quarters for both you and your mother. You were that confident I'd come with you? Elena asked. I was that prepared in case you did, Luca corrected. There's a difference. He gestured toward the entrance, and Elena followed, helping her mother navigate the steps. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun. Miss Rossi, Mrs. Rossi, she said warmly, her accent matching Luca's Italian lilt. Welcome. I'm Maria. Please, come inside. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, expensive art, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. But it wasn't cold or ostentatious. There was warmth here, too, in the family photographs on the side tables, in the well-worn books on the shelves, in the soft lighting that made everything feel lived in rather than staged. "I've prepared the east wing for you," Maria said, leading them toward a curved staircase. "2 bedrooms with a shared sitting room. I thought you might want to be close to each other." "That's very thoughtful," Rosa said, slightly breathless from the walk. "Thank you." As they climbed the stairs slowly, accounting for Rosa's limitations, Elena glanced back at Luca. He stood in the foyer, watching them with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, he nodded slightly, then turned and walked toward what looked like an office, his phone already at his ear. The guest wing was beautiful. The rooms were spacious and elegantly furnished, with views of the gardens and mountains beyond. Maria showed them each bedroom, one with a large 4-poster bed draped in soft linens, the other with a smaller bed and medical equipment that made Elena's throat tighten. "Mr. DeLuca had the medical equipment brought in for you, Mrs. Rossi," Maria explained. "He thought you might need it, given your recent surgery." Rosa sank onto the edge of the bed, her hand pressed to her chest. "I don't understand. How did he know about my surgery?" "He seems to know everything," Elena said quietly. Maria smiled gently. "Mr. DeLuca is very thorough when it comes to protecting people. Now, let me help you with that dress, Miss Rossi. I have clothes prepared for both of you. Simple things, comfortable. I guessed at sizes, but we can adjust as needed." It took 20 minutes to get Elena out of the wedding dress. The gown had what felt like 1,000 buttons, each one a tiny pearl that had to be undone individually. As Maria worked, Elena stood in front of the mirror, watching her reflection shift and change as layers of silk fell away. When the dress finally pooled at her feet, Elena stepped out of it and left it there, a white puddle of broken dreams. Maria tactfully draped it over a chair while Elena pulled on the simple jeans and soft sweater that had been laid out for her. The clothes fit almost perfectly. Of course they did. Luca DeLuca was thorough. Elena pulled the pins from her hair, letting the dark waves fall loose around her shoulders. She scrubbed at her makeup with the wipes Maria provided, wanting to erase every trace of the bride she'd almost become. When she finally looked in the mirror again, she saw herself. Just Elena, pale and exhausted and real. "Better?" Maria asked gently. "I don't know yet," Elena admitted. She checked on her mother, who had changed into comfortable pajamas and was already lying down, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The day had taken its toll on Rosa's fragile health. "Rest, Mama," Elena said, pulling the blankets up around her mother's shoulders. "We'll figure everything out tomorrow." "Be careful, mija," Rosa murmured, already half asleep. "He seems like a good man, but so did Caleb." The words settled over Elena like a warning. She kissed her mother's forehead and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Maria had vanished, leaving Elena alone in the sitting room. Through the windows, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it just reminded Elena that this should have been her wedding night. She should have been at the reception right now, dancing with Caleb, smiling for photographs, pretending to be happy while he counted down the days until he could divorce her and collect his prize. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Luca entered, still wearing his suit but with the jacket removed and his sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He carried a tray with tea and what looked like sandwiches. "Maria prepared food, but I thought you might prefer privacy to the dining room," he said, setting the tray on the coffee table. "Thank you." Elena sat on the sofa, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, too nervous about the wedding to keep anything down. Luca poured the tea with the same precise control he seemed to apply to everything. He handed her a cup, then sat in the chair across from her, maintaining a careful distance. They sat in silence for a moment. Elena sipped the tea, some kind of herbal blend that tasted like comfort, and tried to organize the chaos of questions in her mind. "How did you know?" she finally asked. "About Caleb. About the bet. About all of it." "I make it my business to know things," Luca said, "especially when those things involve people taking advantage of vulnerable individuals." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you right now." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What matters is that you're safe. Caleb Wright cannot reach you here. His father cannot buy his way past my security. You have time to decide what you want to do next. And what about what he said? About the surgery, the medical bills? Will he really sue us? Luca's expression hardened. He was planning to. I've made it clear that would be a mistake. How? By ensuring that if he attempts any legal action against you or your mother, certain information about his business dealings will find its way to the appropriate authorities. Caleb Wright values his freedom more than he values revenge. Elena set down her teacup, her hand shaking slightly. You're blackmailing him. I'm protecting you, Luca corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Elena met his eyes. You crashed my wedding, destroyed a man's reputation, threatened him with legal consequences, and brought me to your home. How is that different from what Caleb did? He manipulated me into marrying him for money. What are you manipulating me into? The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but Elena was too exhausted to soften them. She needed to know what this was, what she'd walked into when she took Luca's hand. To her surprise, Luca smiled, a small, sad expression that made him look younger. You're right to ask that question. You're right to demand answers. He stood, moving to the window, his back to her. The difference, Miss Rosie, is choice. Caleb manipulated you into believing you had no options except him. I'm offering you options with full transparency. What options? You can stay here as long as you need to, days, weeks, months. I'll provide housing, medical care for your mother, and security. In return, I ask nothing except that you allow yourself time to heal and plan your next move without fear. He turned to face her. Or you can leave tomorrow. I'll give you $50,000, help you find an apartment anywhere you want to go, and ensure Caleb Wright never bothers you again. Elena stared at him. Why would you give me $50,000? Because your father's service to my family was worth more than that. Because you deserved the chance to start over without drowning in the same poverty that made you vulnerable to Caleb in the first place. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's a debt repaid. Luca's voice was firm. My uncle promised your father that the DeLuca family would protect his family if needed. That promise has value. Honor has value. Honor, Elena repeated. She stood, moving to face him directly. You keep talking about honor like it means something, but you're... She gestured around the house. You're clearly not just some businessman. The security, the bodyguards, the way you destroyed Caleb's leverage in hours, that's not normal, wealthy person behavior. Luca was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You're perceptive. So tell me the truth. What are you? I'm someone who operates in spaces where normal rules don't always apply. My family's business involves imports, exports, security, and various other enterprises, some of which exist in legal gray areas. He held her gaze. I won't lie to you, Elena. My world is not safe, and my methods are not always conventional. But I have never harmed an innocent person, and I have never broken a promise. You're in the Mafia, Elena said flatly. That's a crude term for a complex reality, but if it helps you understand, then yes, my family has connections to organized crime, primarily in Italy, but we have operations here as well. Elena should have been terrified. She should have run from the room, grabbed her mother, and demanded to leave immediately. But instead, she felt a strange sense of clarity. At least Luca was being honest. At least he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. Why tell me? She asked. You could have kept lying. Because I'm asking you to trust me, and trust without truth is just another form of manipulation. Luca moved closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. I won't insult you by pretending to be a hero. I'm not. But in this situation, I am the lesser evil, and I am genuinely trying to help you. Elena sank back onto the sofa, her mind reeling. A crime boss. She'd left a con artist at the altar and run straight into the protection of a crime boss. The absurdity was almost funny. My mother can never know, she said finally. About your family's business. The truth would destroy her. She won't hear it from me or anyone in my household, Luca promised. And this debt to my father, once it's paid, we're done? You'll leave us alone? Once you're safe and settled, wherever you choose to be, my obligation ends. Unless you need help again, in which case the door remains open. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes were steady, honest in a way Caleb's had never been. There was darkness in Luca de Luca. She could see that clearly. But there was also something else, something that reminded her of her father, a sense of duty, of loyalty, of keeping promises, even when it cost you. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll stay. For now. Until I figure out what comes next." Luca nodded. "That's all I ask." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Elena, may I call you Elena?" "Yes." "What you did today was brave. Not many people would have walked away from security, even security built on lies. You chose truth and freedom over comfort. That takes strength." "Or desperation," Elena said. "I'm still not sure which." "Perhaps both," Luca said. "Often the bravest choices come from desperate circumstances." After he left, Elena sat in the darkening room, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere across the city, her wedding reception had probably descended into chaos. Guests were gossiping. Caleb was raging. His father was making phone calls to try to contain the scandal. And here she was, in a crime boss's mansion, wearing borrowed clothes with no money, no job, no plan. She should have felt terrified. Instead, for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Her phone, which she'd somehow managed to keep in the chaos, buzzed in her pocket. Elena pulled it out, half expecting Caleb. Instead, it was a number she didn't recognize. The text was simple. "I hope you rot for what you did today. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. And now everyone knows it." Elena stared at the message. It was probably from one of Caleb's friends, or maybe Vanessa, lashing out. The words should have hurt. They were designed to hurt. But they didn't, because Elena had spent the entire morning believing she was nothing. A bet, a charity case, a desperate woman too pathetic to deserve real love. She'd stood at that altar prepared to marry a man who saw her as a transaction, and then she'd chosen differently. She deleted the message and turned off her phone. Tomorrow, she would have to face the consequences of her choice. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to rebuild her life from scratch. Tomorrow, she would have to navigate the complicated reality of being indebted to a man whose business operated outside the law. But tonight, she would rest. Elena stood and walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. In the reflection, she could see herself, just a woman, no longer a bride, no longer playing a role in someone else's story, just Elena. And maybe, she thought, that was enough. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting sensation of not knowing where she was. For a moment she lay still, her mind struggling to piece together reality from the fragments of restless dreams. Then memory crashed over her like a wave. The wedding, Caleb's betrayal, Luca's intervention, the mansion where she now found herself a guest, or a prisoner. She still wasn't entirely sure which. She sat up slowly, her body aching with the kind of exhaustion that came from emotional trauma rather than physical exertion. The bedroom was quiet, elegant in its simplicity. Someone had left a tray on the bedside table while she slept. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee in a silver carafe. The thoughtfulness of it made her throat tighten. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, wrapping the robe she found at the foot of the bed around herself. Maria entered, her kind face creased with concern. "Good morning, Miss Elena. I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," Elena said honestly. "Thank you for the breakfast." "Of course. Your mother is awake as well. She's asked to see you when you're ready." Maria hesitated, then added, "Mr. De Luca would also like to speak with you, at your convenience. He's in his office." Elena nodded, her stomach nodding. "Tell him I'll be down shortly, after I check on my mother." 20 minutes later, showered and dressed in more of the mysteriously perfect-fitting clothes from the closet, Elena made her way to her mother's room. She found Rosa sitting up in bed, color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in months, eating eggs and toast with an appetite Elena hadn't seen since before the surgery. "Mija," Rosa said, setting down her fork. "Come, sit. We need to talk." Elena perched on the edge of the bed, bracing herself. "Mama, I know you must be upset." "Upset?" Rosa interrupted. "I'm relieved. Terrified, confused, grateful, and about a dozen other things, but not upset." She took Elena's hand. That man was going to destroy you. Maybe not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of my daughter but an empty shell pretending to be happy. You saw it too? A mother knows, Rosa said softly. I saw how you changed around him, how you made yourself smaller, quieter, how you stopped laughing the way you used to laugh. I told myself it was just wedding nerves, that you were adjusting to a new life, but I knew deep down something was wrong. Then why didn't you say anything? Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Because I was a coward. Because he paid for my surgery, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Because I was so tired of watching you struggle, and I thought maybe this was your chance at an easier life, even if it wasn't a happy one. She gripped Elena's hand tighter. I'm sorry, mija. I should have told you to run the moment I sensed something was off. Elena pulled her mother into a hug, feeling the fragility of her bones, the tremor in her breathing. It's not your fault, Mama. I'm the one who fell for his lies. You fell for what you needed to believe, Rosa corrected gently. That's different. They held each other for a long moment, drawing strength from the familiar comfort of being mother and daughter, the two of them against the world like it had been for so long. This man, Luca, Rosa said when they finally pulled apart. He says he knew your father, says Antonio worked for his family. He was a driver for Luca's uncle. Apparently, Papa earned their loyalty. Rosa's expression grew distant, thoughtful. Your father never talked much about that job. He said it was better I didn't know the details. I always wondered what he meant. She looked at Elena sharply. Do you trust this man? I don't know, Elena admitted. But he's been honest with me so far, which is more than I can say for Caleb, and we don't exactly have other options right now. We always have options, mija, even if they're hard ones. Like what? Going back to the apartment? Caleb would find us. Going somewhere new? With what money? Elena stood, pacing to the window. I hate this. I hate being dependent on another man's charity. But at least this time I know what I'm accepting. Luca isn't pretending this is about love or romance. It's about a debt, pure and simple. Debts can be just as dangerous as love, Rosa warned. Maybe more so. The words followed Elena as she left her mother's room and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of staff moving through distant rooms. She found Luca's office easily, a heavy wooden door at the end of a long hallway, slightly ajar. She knocked, and his voice called out, Enter. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, expensive furniture, walls lined with books in both English and Italian. Luca sat behind a massive desk, surrounded by papers and multiple computer screens. He looked up as she entered, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. Elena, he said, standing. Please, sit. Can I get you anything? Answers, she said, settling into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Starting with what happens now. Luca closed the laptop he'd been working on and gave her his full attention. That depends on what you want to happen. I want to understand what I've walked into. You say this is about a debt to my father, but I need to know what that means. What do you expect from me in return for your protection? Nothing beyond what I've already told you. Time to heal and make decisions without fear. He leaned back in his chair. But I understand why you don't believe that. In your position, I wouldn't either. So prove it, Elena challenged. Tell me the truth about everything, about my father's work for your family, about what you really do, about why you were at that wedding at exactly the right moment to save me. Luca studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. The whole truth. He stood, moving to a cabinet and pouring 2 glasses of water. He handed one to Elena before continuing. Your father worked for my Uncle Dominic from 1998 to 2003. During that time, he drove my uncle to various meetings and business appointments. Some of those meetings were legitimate, others were not. What kind of not legitimate? Elena asked. The kind that involved negotiating territories, settling disputes between families, and occasionally transporting items that shouldn't be transported across state lines. Luca's voice was matter-of-fact. Your father was never involved in violence, never asked to do anything that would have put innocent people at risk. But he was aware of the nature of my uncle's business, and he kept that knowledge to himself. That kind of discretion is valuable. Elena processed this, trying to reconcile the image of her gentle, hard-working father with a man who'd knowingly worked for organized crime. Why did he leave? Because you were born, Luca said simply. He told my uncle he wanted his daughter to grow up with a father who worked regular hours, who didn't come home late smelling of cigar smoke and expensive whiskey. My uncle respected that. He gave your father a generous severance and made him a promise. If Antonio or his family ever needed help, the DeLucas would provide it. And that promise passed to you when your uncle died? 3 years ago, yes. I inherited not just his business, but his obligations. Your father's name was on a very short list of people whose loyalty had earned permanent protection. Luca returned to his desk. I've had someone monitoring your family ever since, very discreetly, just to ensure you were safe and stable. A chill ran down Elena's spine. You've been watching us? Watching over you, Luca corrected. There's a difference. When your father died and the medical bills started accumulating, I almost intervened then, but you were managing, barely but managing, and I didn't want to intrude unless absolutely necessary. Then Caleb showed up, Elena said slowly, understanding dawning. Then Caleb showed up, and my surveillance flagged him immediately. A wealthy man with no apparent reason to be frequenting a diner in your neighborhood, suddenly very interested in a waitress with significant debt. It was suspicious. So you investigated him. Thoroughly. What I found, Luca's expression hardened, was a pattern. Caleb Wright has done this before. Not the marriage scheme specifically, but variations on it. There was a woman 2 years ago, a nursing student he dated for 6 months. He paid for her final semester of school, then dumped her and sued her for the tuition money, claiming she'd defrauded him. She ended up dropping out to work and pay him back. Elena felt sick. Why would anyone do that? Because he can. Because he's bored and cruel and has never faced consequences for anything in his privileged life. Luca's voice was cold with disgust. When I discovered his plan to marry you for the trust fund, I knew I had to act. The question was how and when. Why did you wait until the wedding? Why not tell me earlier? Would you have believed me? Luca asked gently. If a stranger had approached you a month ago and told you Caleb was using you, would you have listened, or would you have thought I was the one with ulterior motives? Elena wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. A month ago, she'd been so deep in Caleb's web of lies that she would have dismissed any warnings as jealousy or interference. I waited until you could see the truth for yourself, Luca continued, the conversation you overheard. I made sure you would overhear it. I had someone call Caleb's phone with an emergency that required him to gather his groomsmen in that specific room at that specific time. I knew you'd be in the bridal suite next door. I knew if you heard him in his own words, you'd finally understand what he really was. You orchestrated the whole thing, Elena said, not sure whether to be grateful or horrified. I created the opportunity for the truth to reveal itself. What you did with that truth, walking away, confronting him, choosing freedom over security, that was all you. Elena stood, needing to move, to process this information while her body was doing something. She walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds. What happens now that I'm here? What about Caleb and his family? Will they retaliate? Caleb is currently dealing with several crises that will keep him occupied for the foreseeable future, Luca said. The insider trading information I mentioned at the wedding, it's already been anonymously submitted to the SEC. His father is scrambling to contain the damage and distance the family business from Caleb's stupidity. They have no time or resources to waste on revenge against you. You destroyed his life, Elena said quietly. I held him accountable for his actions. There's a difference. Luca came to stand beside her at the window, maintaining a careful distance. He'll survive this. His family has enough money and influence to weather the scandal, but he'll think twice before using another vulnerable woman as a pawn. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the mountains in the distance. What about me? Elena asked finally. What's my next move supposed to be? That's entirely up to you. If you want to stay here while you figure things out, you're welcome to. If you want to leave the city entirely, I can arrange that. If you want to go back to school, start a business, do anything that requires capital, I can help. Why would you help me start a business? Because you're 24 years old, intelligent, and capable. You've been stuck in survival mode for so long that you haven't had the chance to think about what you actually want from life beyond making rent and keeping your mother alive. Luca turned to face her. This is your opportunity to choose something for yourself. Not because you're desperate, not because someone's manipulating you, but because it's what you genuinely want. Elena met his eyes, searching for the catch, the hidden agenda, but all she saw was sincerity and something that might have been respect. I need time, she said. Time to think, to breathe, to figure out who I am when I'm not just trying to survive. Take all the time you need, Luca said. This house is large enough that you'll have privacy. My business keeps me occupied most of the day. You and your mother are free to use the grounds, the library, anything you wish. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Luca's men entered, his expression tense. Boss, we have a situation. Caleb Wright is at the gate. Elena's heart stopped. What? Luca's face went cold and dangerous. How did he find this location? Unknown, sir. He's alone, demanding to speak with Miss Rossi. Absolutely not, Luca said immediately. Remove him from the property. Wait, Elena said, surprised by her own voice. Both men turned to look at her. I want to talk to him. Elena, no, Luca started. I need to, Elena interrupted. I need to face him, on my terms this time, and tell him exactly what I think of him and his games. She looked at Luca. But I want you there. And your security. I want him to see that I'm not alone anymore, that I'm not the desperate, grateful girl he manipulated. Luca studied her face, and she could see him weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. All right. But we do this in the foyer, not outside. My men will be present, and if at any point you want him gone, say the word. 10 minutes later, Elena stood in the grand foyer of Luca's mansion, her heart pounding but her spine straight. She changed into a simple black dress, elegant but severe, nothing like the soft, feminine clothes Caleb had always preferred her in. Her hair was pulled back, her face free of makeup. She wanted him to see her, not the version of herself she'd performed for him. The front door opened and Caleb entered, flanked by two of Luca's security team. He looked terrible, his expensive suit rumpled, his face haggard, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. When he saw Elena, something desperate and pleading crossed his features. Elena, thank God, he said, moving toward her. Luca stepped between them smoothly, his presence a wall. That's close enough, right? Caleb's jaw clenched, but he stopped. His eyes found Elena's over Luca's shoulder. Elena, please. I need to talk to you. Alone. No, Elena said, her voice steady. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of witnesses. I'm done with private conversations where your version of events is the only one that matters. This is insane, Caleb said, his voice rising. You're living with this man, this criminal, and you think I'm the bad guy? You are the bad guy, Elena said simply. You used me. You lied to me. You were going to marry me as part of a bet and then destroy my mother and me financially. So yes, Caleb, you are absolutely the bad guy in this story. I can explain. There's nothing to explain. I heard you. I heard every word you said to your friends about how pathetic and desperate I was. How easy it was to manipulate me. Elena took a step forward, and even Luca moved aside slightly, recognizing that she needed this moment. You saw a woman drowning, and instead of helping her, you pushed her head underwater and called it rescue. Caleb's expression shifted, the desperation giving way to anger. You think you're better off with him? Do you have any idea what he is? What his family does? I know exactly what he is, Elena said calmly. And the difference between you and Luca is that he's been honest with me from the start. He told me the truth about his business, his family, and what he wants from me, which is nothing. You built our entire relationship on lies. I love you, Caleb said, and the words sounded hollow even to him. I know I handled things badly, but I do love you. We can fix this. Come back, marry me for real this time, and You'll what? Elena interrupted. You'll keep lying to me? You'll keep using me? No, Caleb. I'm done being your bet, your charity case, your convenient solution to your father's trust fund conditions. You're making a mistake, Caleb said, his voice turning cold. Without me, you're nothing. No job, no money, no prospects. You'll end up right back where you started, broke, desperate, and alone. Maybe, Elena said, but at least I'll be free, and I'd rather be broke and free than rich and trapped in your world of lies. Caleb stared at her, seeming to realize for the first time that she meant every word. Fine, but when this all falls apart, when you realize what you've given up, don't come crawling back to me. I won't, Elena promised, because even at my lowest, I'm worth more than what you were offering. Something in Caleb snapped. He lunged forward, trying to grab Elena's arm, but he didn't make it 2 steps before Luca moved. It was fast, efficient, almost casual. One moment Caleb was moving toward Elena, the next he was on his knees with his arm twisted behind his back and Luca's hand gripping his neck. Touch her, Luca said quietly, his voice deadly calm, and I will break every bone in your hand. Slowly. You can't threaten me, Caleb gasped. Your father is currently trying to save his company from the scandal you've created. He has no time for your tantrums. Luca released him with a shove that sent Caleb stumbling. Now get out of my home and off my property. If you come near Elena or her mother again, if you so much as send a text message, I will make the insider trading investigation look like a minor inconvenience compared to what comes next. Caleb stood, straightening his suit, trying to recover some dignity. His eyes found Elena one last time. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret, Elena said clearly, is ever believing you were someone worth loving. She turned her back on him, dismissing him completely. Behind her, she heard the security team escorting him out, heard the door close, heard the sound of his car speeding away down the drive. Only when the sound faded completely did Elena allow herself to tremble. Luca was beside her immediately, his hand hovering near her elbow, but not touching, offering support without assuming permission. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I don't know, Elena admitted. I thought facing him would make me feel powerful, but I just feel, she struggled for the word, tired. That's normal. Confronting your abuser takes enormous energy. He wasn't, Elena started, then stopped. He was, wasn't he? Maybe not physically, but emotionally, psychologically. He was abusing me. Yes, Luca said gently. What he did to you, the manipulation, the lies, the deliberate exploitation of your vulnerability, that was abuse. Acknowledging that doesn't make you weak. It makes you aware. Elena sank onto the nearby bench, her legs suddenly unsteady. I let him do it. I saw the red flags and ignored them because I was so desperate for security, for someone to take care of my mother, for a life that didn't hurt so much. That doesn't make it your fault, Luca said firmly. He sat beside her, maintaining respectful distance. Predators like Caleb are skilled at finding people's weaknesses and exploiting them. You did what you thought you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that. Then why do I feel so ashamed? Because healing isn't linear, and self-blame is easier than accepting that someone you trusted betrayed you. Luca's voice was surprisingly gentle. But you walked away, Elena. At the worst possible moment, in the most public way imaginable, you chose yourself over security. That took courage most people never find. Elena looked at him, this dangerous man who'd appeared in her life like some dark avenging angel. Why do you care? Really? It can't just be about a promise to my father. Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight of old pain. My sister was in a similar situation once. Different circumstances, but the same fundamental dynamic. A powerful man who saw her as something to be used. I didn't recognize what was happening until it was too late to help her without violence. He met Elena's eyes. She survived, but she was changed by it, diminished. I swore after that I would never stand by while someone with power destroyed someone vulnerable. So yes, it's about the promise to your father, but it's also about making sure no other woman suffers what my sister endured. The raw honesty in his voice made Elena's throat tight. Where is she now? Your sister? Safe. Married to a good man living quietly in Tuscany, raising my nephew and niece. A small smile touched Luca's lips. She found her own version of freedom eventually. I hope the same for you. They sat together in companionable silence, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly fading. Through the windows, Elena could see the grounds stretching out under the afternoon sun. Acres of safety, bought and maintained by a man whose business she didn't fully understand, but whose intentions, at least toward her, seemed genuine. "I want to learn," she said suddenly. "Learn what?" "Everything. I want to learn how to protect myself so I never need someone else's protection again. I want to understand money and business and power so I'm never vulnerable the way I was with Caleb." Elena turned to Luca. "Can you teach me that? Not as charity, but as part of repaying your debt to my father. Teach me how to survive in a world where people like Caleb exist." Luca studied her face, and she could see him considering, weighing options. "That's not a small request. The things you want to learn, they come with their own dangers." "I know, but I'm tired of being kept in the dark because people think I can't handle reality. I can handle it, I just need someone to show me how." "All right," Luca said finally. "I'll teach you. But on one condition: if at any point you want to stop, if you decide this knowledge comes at too high a price, you tell me and we stop. No judgment, no pressure." "Deal," Elena said, extending her hand. Luca took it, his grip firm and warm. They shook on it, and Elena felt something shift, not attraction exactly, but recognition. They were both survivors of worlds that had tried to break them. Both people who understood that sometimes the only way forward was to become harder, sharper, more dangerous than the forces arrayed against you. As Elena stood to return to her mother, she glanced back at Luca one more time. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Approval mixed with concern, respect mixed with wariness. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." "Thank your father," Luca replied. "He's the one who earned this protection. I'm just honoring his legacy." But as Elena walked away, she suspected there was more to Luca's motivations than duty to a dead man's memory. She suspected, in fact, that Luca de Luca was far more complicated than he appeared. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Elena found herself curious rather than afraid of what that complexity might mean. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Elena woke each morning to sunlight and silence, the kind of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Her mother grew stronger with each passing day, the medical equipment in her room becoming less necessary as proper rest and nutrition worked their quiet magic. Maria brought meals that were both nourishing and delicious. And slowly, Rosa's laugh returned, the real one, not the tired approximation she'd been offering for months. Elena spent her mornings with her mother, reading together or simply talking about nothing important. They avoided the topic of Caleb, avoided planning for the future, avoided anything that required decisions. It was a kind of suspended animation, and Elena knew it couldn't last forever, but for now it felt necessary. The afternoons belonged to Luca. True to his word, he'd begun teaching her, not all at once, not with formal lessons, but gradually, through conversation and observation. He showed her how to read financial statements, how to spot inconsistencies that suggested fraud or manipulation. He explained the basics of contract law, pointing out the clauses most people overlooked, the ones that transferred power while appearing innocuous. "Everything is negotiation," he told her one afternoon as they sat in his office, spreadsheets displayed on the screens before them. "Employment, relationships, even casual transactions. The person who understands what they're actually agreeing to holds the advantage." Elena studied the contract he'd placed in front of her. A standard employment agreement, he'd said, from a legitimate business. "What am I looking for?" "Read the termination clause," Luca instructed. She scanned the dense legal language, her eyes catching on a particular phrase. "It says the employer can terminate without cause, but the employee must give 60 days notice. That's unbalanced," Luca finished. "The power flows one direction. An employee desperate for work might sign without noticing. Someone with options would negotiate for equal terms." "Or walk away," Elena said. "Or walk away," Luca agreed, a hint of approval in his voice. "You're learning." These lessons felt different from anything Elena had learned in school. They were practical, rooted in the reality of how power worked rather than how it was supposed to work. Luca taught her to see the world as it was, sometimes ugly, often unfair, but navigable if you understood the rules. In the evenings, she explored the mansion's library, losing herself in books she'd never had time to read before. History, philosophy, biographies of people who'd built empires from nothing. She was hungry for knowledge in a way she hadn't been since before her father died, when survival became more important than growth. It was during one of these evening reading sessions, 2 weeks after the failed wedding, that Luca found her curled up in a leather chair with a book about Catherine de' Medici. "Interesting choice," he commented, settling into the chair across from her. Elena marked her page. "I'm fascinated by how she survived in a world designed to destroy her. A foreign woman in the French court, constantly underestimated, yet she outlasted everyone who tried to use her. She also ordered massacres and manipulated her children like chess pieces," Luca pointed out. "I didn't say she was good. I said she was fascinating." Elena closed the book. "There's something about reading how other women navigated impossible situations. It makes mine feel less—" She searched for the word singular. "You're not alone in what you experienced," Luca said quietly. "Though I suspect knowing that doesn't make it hurt less." "No, but it helps." Elena set the book aside. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough." Elena gathered her courage. "Your sister, the one you mentioned, what happened to her? You said a powerful man used her, but you never explained how." Luca's expression shuddered, and Elena immediately regretted asking, but after a long moment he spoke. "Her name is Sophia. When she was 19, she fell in love with the son of a rival family. Romeo and Juliet nonsense, except this version had no romance, only manipulation." His voice was carefully neutral, but Elena heard the anger beneath it. "He courted her, promised her marriage, made her believe they could bridge the divide between our families. She gave him everything, her trust, her innocence, information about our business operations. He was using her for intelligence," Elena said, understanding. "Yes. When he had what he needed, he discarded her publicly, humiliating her in front of both families. She was devastated, labeled a traitor by some in our own organization." Luca's jaw tightened. "I wanted to kill him. My uncle had to physically restrain me from starting a war that would have gotten dozens of people killed." "What did you do instead?" "I waited, planned. 3 years later, I destroyed his family's shipping business, cost them tens of millions of dollars, and ensured that every door in our world closed to him." Luca's dark eyes met hers. "He lives now in obscurity, his family name synonymous with failure. And Sophia got to watch it happen, got to see that her betrayal was avenged." "Did it help her? The revenge?" "Not as much as I hoped," Luca admitted. "Revenge is satisfying but not healing. What helped Sophia was time, distance, and eventually meeting someone who saw her worth without wanting to exploit it." He paused. "That's why I teach you these things, Elena. Not so you can seek revenge on Caleb Wright, but so you never need someone else to fight your battles." Elena absorbed this, understanding the gift he was offering, not just protection, but power. The kind of power that came from knowledge and skill rather than physical strength or family connections. "I got a call from the diner yesterday," she said, changing the subject to something less heavy. "My old manager asking if I was coming back to work." "What did you tell him?" "That I needed more time, but I can't hide here forever, Luca. Eventually I need to figure out what comes next. I need a job, a place to live, some kind of purpose beyond recovering from Caleb." "What do you want?" Luca asked. "If money and logistics weren't concerns, what would you choose?" Elena had been asking herself that same question for days. "I don't know. Before Papa died, I was taking business classes at community college. I wanted to open a restaurant someday, something small and family-owned. But then life happened, and survival became the only goal." "Do you still want that? A restaurant?" "Maybe. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." Elena stood, moving to the window. Outside, the grounds were dark, except for strategically placed lights that illuminated the gardens. "I spent so long just trying to keep my head above water that I never learned how to swim properly, you know? Now I'm in calm waters, but I don't trust myself to know which direction to go." Luca joined her at the window, his reflection visible in the glass beside hers. "Then maybe the next step isn't choosing a direction. Maybe it's learning to trust your own judgment again." Before Elena could respond, raised voices echoed from somewhere in the house. Luca's posture changed instantly, tension flowing through his frame like electricity. One of his security team appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Boss, we have a problem. Multiple vehicles approaching the property. They're not on the approved list." Oh, Luca's face went cold and dangerous. "How many?" "3 SUVs, could be 8 to 12 men." "Protocol 5, Luca said crisply. He turned to Elena. "Go to your mother's room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Maria." Fear spiked through Elena's chest. "What's happening?" "Probably nothing. Possibly something." Luca was already moving toward his desk, pulling a handgun from a drawer with practiced efficiency. "But I need you safe while I find out which. Is it Caleb?" "Unlikely. This isn't his style." Luca checked the weapon, his movements calm and precise. "More likely someone who thinks my attention is divided, that protecting you makes me vulnerable." The implication chilled Elena. "Someone from your world." "Yes. Now go, please." Elena ran. She found her mother already awake, sitting up in bed with confusion and fear on her face. "Mija, what's happening? I heard shouting." "I don't know, Mama, but Luca said to stay here and lock the door." Elena did exactly that, the heavy bolt sliding into place with a solid thunk. Then she moved to her mother's bedside, taking Rosa's trembling hand. They waited in tense silence, listening to sounds that filtered through the thick walls, car engines, raised voices, the sharp bark of commands. Elena's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She'd been so focused on escaping Caleb's manipulation that she'd almost forgotten the other dangers of Luca's world. "This is my fault," Elena whispered. "He's in danger because he's protecting us." "You don't know that," Rosa said, though her voice shook. Minutes crawled past like hours. Elena found herself remembering everything Luca had told her about his business, about the delicate balance of power in his world, about rivals who saw weakness as opportunity. Had taking her in made him look weak? Had protecting a stranger created vulnerabilities his enemies could exploit? The thought made her sick. A knock at the door nearly made both women jump. "Elena, it's Luca. You can open the door." Elena recognized his voice but hesitated, remembering every movie where someone pretended to be someone they weren't. "Tell me something only you would know." A pause, then Luca's voice came again, warmer this time. "You asked about Sofia over Catherine de' Medici, and you compared learning to swim in calm waters." Elena unlocked the door. Luca stood in the hallway, still armed but relaxed, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry for frightening you. The situation is resolved." "What was it?" Elena demanded. "Who were those men?" "Business associates testing boundaries. They've been reminded of where those boundaries lie." He holstered his weapon. "You're safe. No one will bother you tonight or any other night." Rosa had moved to the doorway, leaning heavily on her cane. "This is the life you lead? Men with guns? Threats in the night?" "Sometimes," Luca said honestly. "Though rarely at my own home. Tonight was an anomaly, and it won't happen again." "You can't promise that," Rosa said. "We're putting you in danger, Luca, and you're putting us in danger by keeping us here." "Mama," Elena started, but Rosa held up a hand. "No, Mija, we need to face reality. This is not our world. These are not our problems to bring to Luca's door." She looked at Luca with surprising steel in her gaze. "You've been kind and generous, more than we had any right to expect, but Elena and I need to stand on our own feet. We can't hide here forever." Luca studied Rosa with what looked like respect. "You're right that this isn't your world, but you're wrong that you're putting me in danger. Tonight had nothing to do with you. It was about old grievances and new ambitions. Your presence here didn't cause it." "But it complicates things for you," Elena said, understanding her mother's point. "Every resource you use protecting us is a resource you can't use somewhere else." "Well, resources aren't the issue," Luca said. "But if you're feeling ready to take the next step toward independence, I can help with that too. Not by abandoning you, but by giving you the tools to build your own security." "What kind of tools?" Elena asked. "An apartment in your name. In a building with excellent security. Enough money to live comfortably for 6 months while you decide what you want to do next." Introduction to people who can help you find legitimate work or start a business, whatever direction you choose. Luca leaned against the doorframe. And my continued protection, discreet but effective, until you're truly stable. That's too much, Elena protested. We can't accept. It's what your father earned, Luca interrupted firmly. Antonio Rossi kept my uncle's secrets for 5 years and never once betrayed that trust, even when he was drowning in debt after leaving our employ. That loyalty has value. Let me honor it. Rosa and Elena exchanged glances, that wordless communication that only mothers and daughters share. Finally, Rosa nodded slightly. Okay, Elena said. But I want to work even while I'm figuring things out. I don't want to just live on charity, even if it's owed charity. I might have something, Luca said thoughtfully. One of my legitimate businesses, a restaurant supply company, needs someone to handle accounts and customer relations. It's honest work, good pay, and it would give you insight into the restaurant industry if you're still considering that path. A restaurant supply company, Elena repeated, suspicion creeping into her voice. Is it really legitimate? Completely. I have several legitimate businesses, Elena. They're profitable, legal, and necessary for maintaining the appearance of respectability. A slight smile touched Luca's lips. Not everything I do involves guns and midnight confrontations. Despite everything, Elena found herself smiling back. When can I start? Monday, if you'd like. I'll introduce you to Marcus, the manager. He's expecting someone, just doesn't know it's you yet. Luca straightened. In the meantime, get some rest. Both of you. I promise no more excitement tonight. After he left, Elena helped her mother back to bed, both of them still processing the evening's events. Rosa looked exhausted, the brief surge of steel-spined determination having taken its toll on her fragile health. Are we doing the right thing? Elena asked quietly, tucking the blankets around her mother. Trusting him? Taking his help? I don't know, mija, Rosa admitted. But I know we can't stay frozen in fear forever. At some point, we have to move forward, even if we're not sure of the path. When did you get so wise? When I realized my daughter is stronger than I ever gave her credit for. Rosa squeezed Elena's hand. You walked away from a wedding to a wealthy man because it was the right thing to do, even though it cost you everything. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had at your age. You had plenty of courage, Mama. You survived Papa's death, your illness, all of it. I survived, Rosa agreed. But you're doing more than surviving, Elena. You're learning to fight back, to build something real instead of just accepting whatever scraps life offers you. Her eyes glistened with tears. Your father would be so proud. The words broke something open in Elena's chest. She kissed her mother's forehead and retreated to her own room, emotions churning. Once the door was closed, she finally allowed herself to feel everything she'd been holding back. The fear from the confrontation earlier, the strange gratitude toward Luca, the grief for her father, who'd set all of this in motion with his loyalty decades ago. She thought about Antonio Rossi, the quiet man who'd worked impossible hours to keep his family fed, who'd driven for criminals but drawn the line at anything that might harm innocent people, who'd left that world to give his daughter a chance at something better. Had he known, when he made his choice, that it would lead to this? That his loyalty would become a lifeline for his family years after his death? Elena moved to the window, looking out at the dark grounds. Somewhere out there in the night were Luca's security team, making sure no one else decided to test boundaries. Somewhere across the city, Caleb was probably still raging at his losses. Somewhere in the world, other women were facing the same choice Elena had faced, security through submission or freedom through risk. She'd chosen freedom, and despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Maria. Instead, Luca entered, his expression carefully neutral. I wanted to check on you. Tonight was more than you bargained for. I'm okay, Elena said, and was surprised to find it was mostly true. Scared for a few minutes, but okay. You handled it well. Many people would have panicked. Many people haven't spent years dealing with crisis after crisis. You learned to stay calm. Elena turned from the window to face him. Tell me the truth. Was tonight about us? About me being here? Luca considered the question, and she appreciated that he didn't immediately offer a comforting lie. Indirectly, perhaps. My taking you in sent a message to certain people that I'm willing to extend protection beyond my immediate circle. That could be seen as either strength or weakness, depending on the observer. And which did they see it as? They saw it as an opportunity to gauge my responses, to see if sentiment had made me soft. His dark eyes met hers. They learned otherwise. What did you do to them? Nothing permanent, but clear enough that they won't make the same mistake twice. Luca moved closer, his presence somehow both dangerous and comforting. I want you to understand something, Elena. The world I operate in, it has rules, but they're not the rules you grew up with. Sometimes violence is necessary. Sometimes fear is the only language certain people understand. I know, Elena said quietly. I'm not naive about what you are, Luca. I'm choosing to accept your help despite knowing, not because I'm ignorant of it. Good, because I won't lie to you about the darkness in my world. But I also won't let that darkness touch you unless absolutely necessary. They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them charged with something Elena couldn't quite name. Not attraction exactly, though Luca was undeniably handsome in his severe way. More like recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to survive in worlds that wanted to break them. Thank you, Elena said finally. For tonight, for the last 2 weeks, for everything. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. You don't need to keep thanking me, Luca said. Just build something good with the chance you've been given. That will be thanks enough. After he left, Elena prepared for bed, her mind still racing, but her body exhausted. She thought about Monday, about starting work at a legitimate business run by a man whose other businesses were anything but legitimate. She thought about the apartment Luca would help her find, about building a life that was truly hers rather than borrowed or stolen or based on lies. She thought about Caleb, briefly, and felt nothing but distant pity. He'd tried to make her into something small and grateful and easy to control. Instead, he'd pushed her towards someone who was teaching her to be sharp and aware and dangerous in her own right. The irony was almost funny. As Elena drifted towards sleep, her last thought was of her father. She imagined him watching from somewhere beyond, seeing his daughter slowly becoming someone who could navigate the world he'd once known. Someone who could take the protection he'd earned through loyalty and transform it into genuine strength. Thank you, Papa, she whispered into the darkness, for everything you gave us, even after you were gone. The night settled around her, quiet and safe, and for the first time since the wedding that never was, Elena slept without nightmares. In the morning, she would start planning her next move. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply rest in the knowledge that she was safe, valued, and no longer alone in fighting for the life she deserved. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. 3 months passed like a dream Elena kept waiting to wake from, except this time the dream was good. She started work at DeLuca Restaurant Supply on that promised Monday, and Marcus, a gruff man in his 50s with kind eyes, put her to work immediately, teaching her the business from the ground up. The work was honest, challenging, and surprisingly fulfilling. Elena discovered she had a talent for understanding what small restaurant owners needed, for building relationships that went beyond simple transactions. The apartment Luca found was in a secure building with a doorman who nodded respectfully each time Elena and her mother entered. It was modest by Luca's standards, but luxurious by theirs. 2 bedrooms, large windows, a kitchen where Rosa could cook without the stove sparking dangerously. For the first time in years, Elena came home to a place that felt like safety, rather than just shelter. Rosa's health continued to improve. With proper rest, good food, and the absence of crushing stress, color returned to her cheeks and strength to her limbs. She even started cooking again, filling the apartment with the sense of Elena's childhood. Garlic and tomatoes, fresh bread, the comfort of meals made with love rather than exhausted obligation. Luca maintained his distance, respectful of the independence Elena was building. He checked in weekly, always professional, always careful not to overstep. Sometimes Elena caught herself missing their afternoon lessons in his office. The way he'd challenge her thinking, push her to see beyond surface appearances. But she understood this was necessary. She needed to prove to herself that she could stand alone before she could trust herself to stand beside anyone. It was late April, the city finally shaking off winter's grip, when everything changed. Elena was at work, reviewing inventory reports. when Marcus appeared in her office doorway with an odd expression on his face. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "Says it's urgent." Elena's first thought was Caleb, and her stomach tightened. But when she reached the lobby, it was one of Luca's security team waiting, the man who'd helped her mother from the car on that chaotic wedding day. "Miss Rossi," he said, his voice tense, "you need to come with me. It's about your mother." Terror shot through Elena's veins. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "She's safe, but there's been an incident. Caleb Wright showed up at your apartment building." The drive to the apartment felt endless despite the security team member breaking every speed limit. He explained as they drove. Caleb had somehow found out where Elena lived, had shown up demanding to see her, and when the doorman refused him entry, he'd become belligerent. Rosa had been returning from a doctor's appointment and witnessed the scene, and the stress had triggered some kind of episode. "She collapsed in the lobby," the man said grimly. "The doorman called an ambulance, then called us. She's at St. Mary's Hospital now. Mr. DeLuca is already there." Elena's hands shook in her lap. 3 months. She'd had 3 months of peace, of building something real, and now Caleb was destroying it all over again. At the hospital, she found Luca in the waiting room, his expression dark with fury, barely contained. When he saw Elena, some of the tension left his shoulders. "She's stable," he said immediately. "The doctors say it was a panic attack, not her heart. They're keeping her overnight for observation, but she should be fine." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully her knees weakened. Luca caught her elbow, steadying her, then guided her to a chair. "Where is he?" Elena asked, her voice shaking with rage now, rather than fear. "Where's Caleb?" "Being detained by police. He violated the restraining order." "What restraining order?" Luca's expression turned slightly sheepish. "The one I had filed on your behalf 6 weeks ago. You signed the papers, remember? You were reviewing a stack of documents from the apartment lease." Elena did remember. A stack of legal papers Luca had said were standard protections. Insurance paperwork, nothing to worry about. She'd trusted him and signed without reading every detail. "You tricked me into signing a restraining order?" "I protected you with legal documents you should have had from the beginning," Luca corrected. "Caleb Wright has been making inquiries about your whereabouts for weeks. I knew eventually he'd find you. I wanted legal consequences waiting when he did." Elena should have been angry about the deception, but instead she felt only gratitude. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still need to deal with the fact that he knows where you live. The apartment isn't safe anymore." "So we move again?" Elena heard the defeat in her own voice. "We just keep running every time he finds us?" "No," Luca said, his voice hard. "We end this, permanently." Before Elena could ask what he meant, a doctor appeared, and Elena was allowed to see her mother. Rosa looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, IV lines running into her arm, monitors beeping softly. But her eyes were clear when Elena entered. "Mija," she said, her voice weak but steady. "I'm sorry for scaring you." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Elena said, taking her mother's hand. "This is Caleb's fault. All of it." "That boy is sick in his head," Rosa said with surprising venom. "Standing there screaming at the doorman, saying terrible things about you. I couldn't just stand there and let him—" She stopped, breathing hard, and Elena squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Mama. Rest. We'll figure everything out." "Luca was here earlier," Rosa said. "He looked like he wanted to kill someone." "He probably does." "Elena," Rosa's grip tightened, "be careful. That man cares about you. I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, but his world is dangerous, and caring about people in that world doesn't always end well." Elena's heart stuttered. "He doesn't... We're not... I'm old and sick, Mija, not blind," Rosa interrupted gently. "And you look at him the same way, like he's solid ground in an earthquake." She paused, catching her breath. "I'm not saying it's wrong. After what Caleb did to you, maybe you need someone strong. But strength can be protection or a cage. Make sure you know the difference." The words haunted Elena as she returned to the waiting room. Luca was on his phone speaking rapid Italian, his free hand gesturing sharply. When he saw Elena, he ended the call immediately. "She's resting," Elena reported. They're going to keep her tonight, release her tomorrow if everything stays stable. Good. I have security stationed outside her room. No one gets in except medical staff and you. Thank you. Elena sat down, suddenly exhausted. What did you mean before? About ending this permanently? Luca was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words. Caleb Wright is never going to stop. You humiliated him, cost him his inheritance, destroyed his reputation. Men like him, they don't accept defeat. They obsess. They spiral. They become dangerous. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we give him what he thinks he wants, a confrontation, but on our terms, with witnesses and consequences that will ensure he never bothers you again. Elena studied Luca's face, trying to read the plan behind his dark eyes. What kind of confrontation? The legal kind. My lawyers can file a civil suit against him for emotional distress, fraud, and a dozen other charges. We make it public, make it expensive, make it so damaging that his family will have no choice but to control him or disown him entirely. That could take years, Elena said, and cost a fortune in legal fees. I have both time and money. The question is whether you're willing to fight this battle or whether you'd prefer to keep running. Elena thought about the last 3 months, the peace she'd found, the life she'd been building. Then she thought about her mother in that hospital bed, about the fear that would follow them everywhere if Caleb remained a threat. I'm done running, she said, but I want to face him myself, not in a courtroom with lawyers speaking for me. I want to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of him and his pathetic obsession. A slow smile crossed Luca's face. I was hoping you'd say that. 2 days later, arrangements had been made. Caleb, facing criminal charges for violating the restraining order, had been released on bail by his father's lawyers. He'd immediately started making threats again, calling Elena's work, leaving messages that bordered on harassment. Luca's people intercepted them all, building a case while setting a trap. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a conference room at a law firm that had no connection to either Luca or the Wright family. Caleb's lawyers insisted on it, suspicious of any venue Luca might control. What they didn't know was that Luca had relationships everywhere, and this particular law firm owed him favors that had nothing to do with his legitimate businesses. Elena dressed carefully that morning, a navy suit that made her look professional and powerful, her hair pulled back severely, minimal makeup. She wanted Caleb to see exactly how much she'd changed from the desperate waitress he'd manipulated. Luca picked her up personally, arriving in a car even more expensive than usual. He wore a black suit that made him look like exactly what he was, dangerous and powerful. You don't have to do this, he said as they drove. I can handle everything through legal channels. I need to do this, Elena replied. For me. To prove that he has no power over me anymore. He doesn't. He never really did. He just made you think he did. Then it's time he learned that lesson too. The conference room was sterile and professional, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. Caleb was already there when they arrived, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked worse than Elena had ever seen him. Weight lost, eyes bloodshot, that polished exterior cracked to reveal the desperate man beneath. When he saw Elena, something wild flashed across his face. Finally you agree to see me. I've been trying to reach you for months. Sit down, Mr. Wright, one of Luca's lawyers said coolly. This is a mediated discussion, not a reunion. Caleb ignored him, his eyes locked on Elena. You destroyed my life, you and this criminal you're sleeping with. Careful, Luca said quietly, and the single word carried enough menace that Caleb actually took a step back. Elena raised a hand, stopping Luca from saying more. I'll handle this. She moved to stand directly across from Caleb, the conference table between them. You want to talk about destroyed lives? Let's talk about how you targeted a vulnerable woman, manipulated her into falling in love with you, all so you could collect an inheritance. Let's talk about how you planned to divorce me and sue me for money I never had. Let's talk about the bet you made with your friends about how easy I'd be to control. That was, Caleb started, but Elena cut him off. I'm not finished. You saw someone drowning, and instead of helping, you pushed them under and called it rescue. You're not the victim here, Caleb. You're the predator who got caught. and now you're facing consequences for the first time in your privileged life, and you can't handle it. I loved you, Caleb said, and he actually sounded like he believed it. I know I handled things badly, but I did love you. I still do. No, you don't, Elena said firmly. You don't even know what love is. Love isn't control. It isn't manipulation. It isn't using someone's desperation against them. What you felt for me was ownership, possession, and when I took that away by leaving, you couldn't accept it. You humiliated me, Caleb's voice rose. In front of everyone. You made me look like a fool. You made yourself look like a fool, Elena interrupted. I just refuse to be part of your performance anymore. Caleb's hands clenched into fists on the table. You think you're so much better now? You think because this mobster is protecting you, you're safe? You're just trading one cage for another, Elena. At least I offered you legitimacy. Legitimacy built on lies, Elena said. Luca has been more honest with me in 3 months than you were in 6. He told me exactly what he is, what his world involves, what he can and can't offer. You lied about everything, including your own heart. So you are sleeping with him, Caleb said, something ugly twisting his features. That's none of your business, Elena replied calmly. What I do, who I'm with, how I live my life, none of it concerns you anymore, and it never will again. We'll see about that, Caleb threatened. My father has resources. Your father, one of Luca's lawyers interrupted smoothly, has made it quite clear he wants nothing more to do with cleaning up your messes. In fact, we have a signed statement from him indicating that any further harassment of Miss Rossi will result in him cutting you off entirely. You're on your own, Mr. Wright. The color drained from Caleb's face. He already has, the lawyer continued. He's tired of your behavior damaging the family reputation. He's particularly unhappy about the SEC investigation, which has cost the company considerable money and prestige. You have a choice, Mr. Wright. You can accept the terms we're offering, a formal agreement that you will have no contact with Miss Rossi or her family, that you will withdraw all claims against her, and that you will cease all harassment, or you can face both civil and criminal prosecution without your family's resources to protect you. Caleb looked between his lawyers, clearly hoping for support. They remained silent, their expressions suggesting they'd already advised him to take the deal. What happens if I refuse? Caleb asked, but his voice had lost its bravado. Then we proceed with a lawsuit that will tie you up in court for years and cost you whatever remains of your reputation, Luca said, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the room. We have documentation of everything, the bet, the plan to defraud Elena, your pattern of similar behavior with other women. It will all become public record, every detail, every humiliating moment. You're bluffing. Try me, Luca said softly, and something in his voice made it clear he was not. Caleb turned back to Elena, desperation replacing anger. Please, Elena, please. We can work this out. Just talk to me. Just give me a chance to explain. No, Elena said simply. I gave you chances, Caleb. I gave you my trust, my hope, my belief that you were someone good. You used all of it against me. I won't make that mistake again. So that's it? You're just going to let him control your life now? He's not controlling my life. He's protecting me from you. There's a difference. Elena leaned forward slightly. I have a job I love, an apartment I chose, friends I'm making, a life I'm building. It's small and normal and completely mine. You can't touch it anymore, Caleb. You have no power here. The truth of it seemed to finally penetrate. Caleb slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him all at once. He looked pathetic, Elena thought. Not dangerous or powerful, just a spoiled man-child who'd finally hit a wall he couldn't buy or charm his way through. Sign the agreement, one of his lawyers murmured. Cut your losses. Caleb stared at the papers in front of him for a long moment. Then, with shaking hands, he picked up the pen and signed. It was done. Elena watched as the lawyers collected the documents, witnessed the signatures, made it all legally binding. She felt strangely empty, not triumphant, not relieved, just tired. This man had consumed so much of her life, her energy, her fear, and now he was just words on paper, an agreement not to bother her, a fading memory of who she used to be when she believed his lies. Can I go? She asked the lawyers. Yes, Miss Rossi, you're free to leave. We'll file this with the court and send you copies for your records. Elena stood, and Luca stood with her. As they moved toward the door, Caleb called out one last time. I really did love you, in my own way. Elena paused, looking back at him. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him, this broken man who genuinely didn't understand that his own way was twisted and wrong. Then I hope someday you learn what love actually means, she said quietly, because what you felt for me wasn't it. She walked out without looking back. In the car, Luca was silent, giving her space to process. Elena stared out the window at the city streaming past, feeling the weight of the last months finally lifting. It was over, truly over. Caleb had signed away his right to contact her, to threaten her, to invade her life. Her mother was safe. She was safe. Thank you, she said finally. You handled that perfectly, Luca replied. You didn't need me at all. Yes, I did. Maybe not in that room, but for everything that led to that room. For giving me time to heal, to learn, to become strong enough to face him without falling apart. Luca glanced at her, something warm in his dark eyes. You were always strong enough, Elena. You just needed someone to remind you. They drove in comfortable silence until Luca pulled up not at Elena's apartment, but at his mansion. She looked at him questioningly. I thought you might want to celebrate, he said. Maria's preparing dinner. Your mother is being discharged from the hospital this afternoon. I've arranged for her to be brought here so we can all eat together. You arranged all this without asking me? I arranged options, Luca corrected with a slight smile. You're free to refuse and go home if you prefer, but I hoped, you might want company tonight. Elena considered. A few months ago, she would have been suspicious of the presumption, worried about owing more debts. But now she understood Luca better. Understood that for him, taking care of people he valued wasn't manipulation. It was simply who he was. Dinner sounds nice, she said. The evening was perfect in its simplicity. Maria had prepared a feast, pasta and wine and fresh bread, cannoli for dessert. Rosa arrived looking tired but happy, her color good, her spirits lifted by seeing Elena relaxed and smiling. They ate in the mansion's informal dining room, the three of them and Luca, talking about everything and nothing. Elena found herself laughing more than she had in months, her mother telling embarrassing stories from Elena's childhood, Luca surprising them both with his dry sense of humor. It felt like family, she realized. Not the family she'd been born into, but the family she was choosing. After dinner, Rosa retired early, exhausted but content. Maria helped her to a guest room, leaving Elena and Luca alone in the sitting room with the last of the wine. I've been thinking, Elena said, curling into one of the leather chairs, about what comes next. Oh? I want to stay at the restaurant supply company. Marcus has been talking about expanding, maybe opening a second location. He's offered to make me a partner if I'm interested. That's an excellent opportunity, Luca said. Marcus doesn't make offers like that lightly. I know. And I've been saving money, living carefully. In another year, I might have enough to actually buy in. Elena paused, gathering courage. But I've also been thinking about something else. What's that? About how my mother was right. About how you look at me sometimes. About how I look at you. Luca went very still. Elena, I'm not saying I'm ready for anything. I'm not sure I know how to trust my judgment about men after Caleb, she continued quickly. But I think when I am ready, when I've had enough time to be sure, I'd like to see if there could be something between us. Something real, built on honesty instead of lies or debts or obligations. Luca set down his wine glass and moved to kneel in front of her chair, putting himself at her eye level. I would like that too. Very much. But you're right to take time. After what you've been through, you deserve to choose freely, not because you feel grateful or obligated. What if I already know? Elena asked softly. What if I've known for a while, but I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own first? Can you? Stand on your own? Yes, Elena said with certainty. I have a job I'm good at, an apartment I pay for with my own money, friends I'm making outside your circle. I'm building a life that's mine. Not because someone rescued me or because I had no choice, but because I'm choosing it every day. Then what are you choosing right now? Luca asked, his voice rough. Elena took his face in her hands, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. I'm choosing to stop being afraid. To stop letting Caleb's betrayal define what I believe about people. To trust myself enough to see you for what you are. Not a savior, not a debt collector, but a good man in a complicated world who keeps his promises. I'm not that good, Luca warned. My world is dark, Elena. I've done things that would horrify you. I know, Elena interrupted. But you've also been honest with me, protected me without asking for anything in return, taught me to be strong instead of keeping me weak and dependent. That means something. That means everything. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative. Luca froze for just a moment before responding, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luca rested his forehead against hers. We go slowly, he said. We take time. We make sure this is real and right and not just a reaction to trauma. Agreed, Elena whispered. But we also don't waste what we have out of fear. Agreed. They sat together in the quiet room, not rushing toward anything, just being present in the moment. Outside, night had fully fallen, but inside something new was beginning. Something that felt like possibility, like hope, like the future Elena had thought she'd lost when she walked away from that wedding. 6 months later, Elena stood in a different kind of white dress, simple, elegant, chosen by her, and paid for with her own money. The venue was small, just a garden at Luca's estate, with only the people who mattered in attendance. Rosa, healthy and smiling, tears of joy on her face. Marcus and his wife. Maria and the household staff who'd become like family. A handful of Luca's trusted associates, men whose dangerous work was left at the gate for this one peaceful day. No society guests, no photographers, no spectacle, just truth. Luca waited for her at the end of a simple aisle, wearing a dark suit, his expression open in a way few people ever got to see. When Elena reached him, when she took his hands in hers, she felt no fear, no doubt, no dread that this was another beautiful lie. You're sure? He asked quietly, giving her one last chance to back out. I'm sure, Elena said. This time, I'm choosing freely. Not because I need rescue, but because I want partnership. Because I love you. I love you too, Luca said, and the words carried the weight of absolute truth. I promise to honor you, protect you, and never lie to you as long as we both live. I promise to stand beside you, to be honest with you, and to build a life with you based on respect and truth, Elena replied, the vows they'd written together simple and sincere. When they kissed, it felt like coming home. Not to a place, but to a person, to the life they'd chosen together. The reception was small and joyful, full of laughter and good food and the easy comfort of people who genuinely cared for one another. Rosa danced with Luca, telling him in Italian-accented Spanish that if he ever hurt her daughter, not even his security team would save him. He promised solemnly that he wouldn't. As the sun set, Elena found herself standing at the edge of the garden, looking back at the small gathering. Her mother, healthy and happy. Luca, talking with Marcus about business, his face relaxed. Maria, making sure everyone had enough to eat. This was her life now. Not the fantasies she'd tried to grasp with Caleb, all surface beauty hiding rot underneath, but something real, built on truth and choice, and the kind of love that came from truly seeing another person and choosing them anyway. Mrs. DeLuca, Luca said softly, coming up beside her. Having second thoughts? Not even a little, Elena said, leaning into his warmth. I was just thinking about how different this is from what I imagined a year ago. Better or worse? Different, Elena said. That wedding would have been bigger, more expensive, more impressive to people who don't matter. This one is small and simple and exactly what I wanted. Good, Luca said, pressing a kiss to her temple, because you deserve to have exactly what you want, not what someone else tells you to want. They stood together as the stars came out, watching their small gathering of loved ones, and Elena felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. Complete peace. Not because her life was perfect or easy or without complications, but because it was hers, chosen freely, built honestly, shared with someone who saw her value without trying to diminish it. She was no longer the desperate girl who'd almost married a lie. She was Elena DeLuca, wife to a complicated man, daughter to a strong woman, friend to good people, and most importantly, herself. Fully, completely, unapologetically herself. And that, she thought, as Luca's arm tightened around her waist, was worth more than any inheritance, any rescue, any fantasy she might have chased. This was real. This was chosen. This was love. And it was more than enough.